Okay. So we are live. We are in Token 2049 Dubai, and yeah, I'm super excited to interview and be honored actually, like to have this quick and dirty kind of interview around Kaito with you. You wanna quickly introduce yourself for the people that doesn't know you?
Glad to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Yuhu. I'm the founder and CEO of Kaito AI. We're building an InfoFi network in the crypto space.
I'm super excited for the context. Like, what is Kaito? How you got inspired to build Kaito? Let's be kind of like transparent here. Let's be kind of like super excited.
Yeah, I mean, I was a trader for most of my career, and then I started trading crypto, and I realized that information is just all over the place. And it's just such a pain for me to essentially go through Twitter, Discord, Medium, Mirror, Telegram, all these kind of information sources. So I thought to myself, I need to build a search engine that can really help me understand the information flow of things. And over time, I realized that momentum is such a big driver in crypto assets. So I started looking at, mindshare, sentiment, all these kind of different indexes that we essentially construct ourselves. And over time, obviously, we start to realize there's a tremendous amount of value in attention itself, in monetizing attention, distributing attention. And hence why we essentially launched Yaps around about five months ago, almost half a year ago now. And we didn't think it's gonna be so big, but it turned out to be pretty good.
I mean, I think people at the end want to be real. They want to understand who you're actually providing, giving value to the ecosystem. And it's amazing actually that, now there is actually a tool that is unbiased and is also providing true kind of like data. Because sometimes even back in the days, I remember like, there was no kind of like tooling, or even if there was tooling, you get kind of like social sentiment from everywhere. And I think that was one of the biggest kind of pain points, that even like a friction for people. What are the friction you saw back in the days?
Yeah, so I think human nature is you have relatively good feeling for some of the top of the leaderboard stuff, right? So everyone knows there are certain KOLs that have massive influence. But when you come to kind of the mid-tier KOLs, or if you're talking about a KOL in specific ecosystem, in specific subsectors and stuff, there's a limit in terms of how much that people can actually quantify and feel about stuff. And that is really where AI comes in. AI can essentially solve all of these long tail problems in a very, very efficient way. And that's essentially how we introduced algorithms to essentially start tokenizing and quantify attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think attention is one of kind of the most important metrics in the ecosystem to understand value. So run us through kind of like all the lessons learned, because a lot of builders kind of devils are kind of like hearing us like, what are the things that you learned during building this from scratch, right? Like that that other people could actually say, oh, this actually is something that I wish to know, even like building something.
Yeah. So maybe a few things. I think a proper system and a well thought out, built out system takes time. So people thought that maybe Kaito launched Yaps out of nowhere, but actually Kaito's been building for the past 3 years. So there's a lot of stuff that we essentially laid the foundation of everything that people see today over a long period of time. So there is tremendous amount of investment into the infrastructure that we build over time. So that's number one in terms of just things take time. Number two is, I think, having the right mentality of being a very, very agile builder is very important. So our philosophy is always to build and iterate. So launch something first, see if it works. If it does work, then listen to the feedback from the community, see how you go from that. If it doesn't work, again, just listen to community feedback and then change your direction. We've tried, actually very few people knew this, but before Yaps, we launched another retail product that was like a year ago. Actually at this point, 1-2 years ago. And it was a retail search engine. But essentially we realized that not everyone understands how to search. And So it was kind of lazy for us to think about bringing, because we have a kind of an institutional platform, which is the kind of the pro product. It's lazy for us to think about basically building a freemium version of that. And I think that is going to work for the retail market, but it doesn't work. So essentially the retail market wants something that's completely different, that's much easier to essentially understand. And hence what I think the Yaps leaderboard stuff is a perfect sort of a showcase in terms of how, it's effectively still built on top of the same tech infrastructure, but with some sort of adaptation, then it can become sort of in a completely different form, and it is kind of a well absorbed and sort of adopted by the market.
Yeah, I mean, this is so important lesson learned, right? You need to fine tune your products in terms of like who you're distributing to, who will consume even your product, and what you're saying here is such an important kind of like rule whenever you're building. And you think like the fact that you build everything from scratch, people can argue stuff like, oh, but this is a black box. I think like you're creating value for people to understand the market.
Yep.
But do you feel like the infrastructure, the tooling, like back in the days, but even now, are here? I feel like sometimes you get like social sentiment API from extra companies. I feel like we are missing some toolings. Do you feel still like they're missing some gaps?
Yep.
Because like the fact that you're building this from scratch also like means like on my side it's like, oh, like you build from scratch because also
Yep.
you need to build integration even yourself.
Yep.
What are we missing today to expand? Because I feel there is so much potential on that side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for a long period of time there was to some extent over investment into infrastructure for the entire space, but stuff like the stuff that we did at Kaito is basically building an app that throughout our journey would essentially build all of the mini infrastructure that is able to be leveraged by other people, right? Think about all the APIs, think about how we're approaching kind of the Yaps API. So essentially open API for anyone to essentially access people's Yaps. Then all of a sudden that becomes the
Kind of
that becomes the kind of the open protocol for anyone to essentially anyone to access kind of the social reputation and mindshare side of things. But to some extent, you need more builders to be kind of approaching these from kind of a practical aspect.
Yes.
And then start building things that are actually used by people, and then make it more kind of accessible to other kind of builders in the space. So then becomes a positive flywheel, because you're basically making something that's already useful, and then it can power other applications so that other people can spend much less time in terms of developing stuff, and at the same time effectively creates a flywheel for the adoption for your own product, right? So nowadays, because CDFI, I think the other day was kind of a we don't even know this, but like they've for example integrated with Yaps. So when people are going through Launchpad, people with higher social reputation can essentially maybe consider a higher allocation, stuff like that. So these things become very composable. That actually puts more value into the Yaps ecosystem, right? So then that becomes something that more people will focus on because it brings more value.
I mean, what you're describing here at the end is like permissionless innovation at its best, right?
Yep.
You're building also this infrastructure for other builders to expand. And when we're speaking about this, the people know I'm super excited always about speaking about like MetaMask Naps. So building kind of infrastructure and leveraging your own technology to build and extend the product. And I think also like Kaito is moving in this kind of like kind of like leveling lower, almost at the infra level, so that allow other people to leveraging all this kind of system, right?
Yep.
I mean, I think like Connect was like one first successful like kind of like test that came out like about kind of how we kind of incentivize a better quality to the community that actually community members provide value.
Yep.
I want to touch a bit on kind of like what do you think about the future? How was the incentive at back in the days? I mean, stuff with airdrop and stuff, but how is it going? Where we're going in terms of incentive, but how are we finding the true gems to reward?
Yeah, I think by and large, it's incentives are getting smarter and smarter. I think in the last cycle, everyone is chasing some of the big numbers. I think in the current cycle, there's a less and less focus on 10 millions of testnet users, all this kind of stuff, because it's much more like, if you're building a DeFi protocol, serving the right 10,000 users, 10,000 high value users, that's the most important stuff, rather than chasing how many users in general are kind of using your product, right? So I think in general, there's a kind of a higher emphasis to focus on some of the real metrics, and how do you direct the incentives to essentially reward the real users becomes then extremely powerful. So that's what we're seeing. Make Sybil or sibling activities much tougher, and build up a social reputation over time that combines on-chain and off-chain footprint.
Chain, I like it. Yes.
Yes, because one of the reasons why layer one incentives testnet is always so prone to kind of civil activities is because there's no track record. You're building a new layer one, there's kind of a isolated sort of almost an island there, right?
Yes.
But if you are now requiring people to be using kind of some of the social credentials and maybe some of the on-chain reputation stuff, then it becomes exponentially tougher to essentially come up with a whole new identity that carries the same sort of reputation, right? So, and I think that imagine a world where in the future, your social reputation comes from not just crypto Twitter, for example, but also your activities on Instagram, YouTube, and all the other platforms. It just becomes so much harder to do that.
Yes.
And then if we've seen, for example, last weekend, Twitter monetization got a huge 4x, roughly 4x payout jump. And the only reason was they basically just filter out all the bots. So historically, all the bots are, all kind of sharing a lot of the, X monetization. And then nowadays they've done a great effort in terms of filtering out all of that. And then all of a sudden, real accounts are getting 4x in terms of the payout. And that's the power of smart incentives, because you need to basically make it much tougher for basically some of the non-real users to essentially getting, so that you can reward disproportionately kind of the real users.
It is really cool. I mean, the fact that you guys want to like introduce stuff like, smart followers, these kind of things was so powerful, because it gave also the people an understanding, hey, these metrics are much more worthful to actually like check.
Yep.
So I think the game here is also like understanding which kind of metrics are defining really success.
Yep.
What do you think are the metrics that you think people kind of like underestimate, like in the market?
Underestimating in the market, I think.
So like, for example, like a TVL of layer 2 doesn't matter. Like, what matters also like what kind of builder's contribution you have, but maybe also that I want to kind of like learn from you also, like what are those kind of like metrics that you think this is something that not a lot of people are looking at, but matter a lot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you talk about kind of both, I guess infrastructure plays, but also protocol plays. I think increasingly protocols are focused on not just TVLs, but actually the quality of TVL and maybe the velocity of the transactions and fees ultimately, right? So how much money that the protocol is making, which is effectively the ground truth of sustainability and the traction of the protocol. Chains are obviously different, or infrastructure plays are very unique in its own stance, but there's always I think in kind of the current cycle in particular, I think even just, for example, you talked about smart followers. Back in the day, everyone's chasing maybe 100,000 followers. Nowadays, everyone's talking about how many smart followers they have. So that's a good thing in my view, and that's having honesty and integrity in terms of the into the whole system, and people chasing real numbers. And for example, when you talk about chains and stuff, then it's the real developer activities and velocity that people have been doing stuff. So these are very, 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 very important metrics, rather than having a ton of a stale TVL on the chain. It doesn't really kind of do much.
obviously like the North Star is onboarding more like users, could be Web2 users, more users in the ecosystem. Is there a way to track, like to have metrics or define success? Could be product, infra, everything. Define only on this because we are speaking always about how we get there, like chain abstraction. Could be like starting to abstract away, seamless onboarding, embedded wallets. Like, but at the end of the day, like we are doing that for the North Star to acquire more users. But is there a way to tie this kind of node metric to this kind of like Kaito metrics? Like, is this something that you're thinking about?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's a trend towards kind of a practical metrics, right? So people are placing more and more focus on the real metrics. So when people talk about the adoption, there's less and less focus on hundreds of millions of transactions, but actually the size and the fees that you are charging, stuff like this, to effectively better measure the adoption. So I think that is true across the board. So, I think, and even just, when you talk about kind of adoption for apps and stuff like this, people now, there's a much stronger tendency in terms of looking at what's meaningful here.
Yes.
What are the real KPIs that you want to disclose, rather than some of the top line metrics.
Also like the fact that like Kaito is kind of like an external platform to the product, is also like give unbiased opinion of
Yeah.
those metrics. I think because I looked a lot around who is the role to define those metrics, and sometimes the company inside has their own metrics. They can basically like brand and position their own metrics that they want. But
Yep.
the fact there is a Kaito out there kind of like defending the right to have unbiased kind of like metrics and numbers
Yep.
is also give me a lot of like I would say like respect, because that's super important. I mean, we're almost out of time here, but what are kind of the verticals that you guys are looking into like working more? I know
Yep.
you're kind of like pushing kind of like a new kind of like way of like
Yep.
like on the Kaito Connect. What
Yep.
are the things that you're kind of excited about to say, hey, working on this is
Yeah. So if I think about Kaito today, we've done a relatively good job in terms of building the new mechanism for attention formation, and that's effectively Yap leaderboard. And I think the next two focuses is going to be capital formation,
yes.
and then number two is market formation. And market formation being, allowing people to trade mindshare, trade narrative, express certain views, unlocking kind of a new market primitives. So these two are going to be kind of new innovations that's going to come to the market.
Yes. At the end, you're shaping also the narrative how companies or products are interacting with communities, right? I
Yes.
think that's really exciting. And you some hot takes around could be like the social sentiment, hot takes around Kaito. Anything that you want to share?
I think we're very, very early. It's just that most of the folks think about Kaito as Yap's game. but underlying everything, there's a huge economy that's being formed.
Yeah.
And I think that in hindsight, people would be thinking, okay, they're actually building something that's very different, and it's going to be long lasting, and it's going to fundamentally change the relationship among brands, users, content creators within the whole new attention economy.
Especially because this can be applied also into Web2 products, right?
Yeah.
This is amazing. Something that is the evolution of engaging with communities.
Yep.
Okay, last spicy question. You give us a fun fact about you.
Fun fact. I don't know, like many people complain about the heat in Dubai and all that kind of stuff. I think it's actually fine. I love
Singapore is also very,
Yeah.
very good.
I chose to be living in Singapore. I relocated to Singapore from London.
Yeah.
So obviously I enjoy all of these.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, to listening about this. I think, this is the future on how companies and product are engaging with communities and look at smart metrics. Thanks so much, you very much. And
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
bye bye.